The Isle of Thanet, possibly named after a Phoenician goddess, definitely not named after anything sensible. Today, dear beautiful YouTuber, I'm over the moon to have you join me as we go over this script I've taken far too long writing for the tragicomic tale of the Isle of Thanet, a little corner of Britain that used to be an island until it decided it didn't want to do that anymore. We'll explore how this chalky outcrop flirted with Phoenician goddesses, went from Roman landing pad to Saxon invasion staging post to Viking Airbnb, and eventually ghosted its own geography. If you've ever wondered how a place can be sacred, strategic, and non-existent all at once, then Thanet is your answer. I am AncientSwan, and I couldn't be more happy you're here if I tried. Today, Thanet is the name given to the northeast tip of Kent, England, a place that once proudly called itself an island, but now clings to that identity in the same way that I do to my youth when I had a six-pack, and not the beer-belly man tits that I have now. Once separated from the mainland by the 600-metre-wide Wantsome Channel, Thanet was a bona fide island. Now, it's just another boring part of the UK. The Wantsome Channel, which once gave Thanet its island status, was a tidal waterway that once connected the Thames estuary to the English Channel. It was a strategic shortcut, a smug little aquatic bypass that made Thanet feel important. But like all things British and vaguely functional, it began silting up in the 12th century, because why maintain a vital waterway when you can just let nature slowly erase your existence? Today the channel is gone. You can walk to Thanet. No boats, no bridges, no drama. But what was life like before, when drama was an everyday occurrence? Evidence shows that Thanet has been inhabited since ancient times, which is archaeologists speak for, we found some pottery shards and a suspiciously shaped rock. The area was likely used by prehistoric Britons who saw the island and thought, yes, this place will be perfect for my grandchildren's existential suffering. Then came the Romans. In 54 BC, Julius Caesar landed here during his second invasion of Britain. He built a fort, presumably to keep the locals from throwing sticks at his sandals, and used Thanet as a base of operations. It was a strategic choice, though one suspects Caesar looked around and thought, this is fine, I guess. After the Britons had handed the Romans their asses in their first attempted invasion of Britain, the Romans returned almost 100 years later, once again, using the Isle of Thanet as a staging post. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius sent 4 legions to Britain, where they would remain for another 400 years, and once again Thanet became an important island for the Romans to sit and think about nice things before stomping around pillaging and killing folks who disagreed with their being there. Fast forward to the 5th century AD, the Romans have finally gone, and Thanet becomes the setting for one of Britain's earliest examples of what it's like to hire mercenaries and then regret everything. According to the 8th century book, Historia Britonum, meaning the history of the Britons, Vortigern, king of the Britons, came under attack from a whole host of surrounding tribes, and so the king sent out a plea for help from overseas. Among those to answer his call were the Jute warlords Hengist and Horsa, all the way from over the sea in present-day Denmark. The Jutes were successful in helping the king repel his enemies, and as a big giant thank you, King Vortigern gave the Isle of Thanet to the brothers Hengist and Horsa. However, things did not turn out all roses and loveliness as one may expect. Realizing how easy their victory had been, the brothers also then quickly realized that if they'd wanted to, they easily could have taken much more. And so they rebelled against Vortigern before going on to kill some more Britons. Although Horsa died in battle, presumably because he didn't read the fine print on the Invade Britain contract. His brother Hengist went on to conquer the whole of Kent and thrived, leading the Angles, Jutes and Saxons in a full-scale invasion of Britain. Thanet, once a gift, became the launchpad for centuries of cultural confusion and, questionable architecture. And so, if you're one of the 65 trillion people on Earth who speaks the planet's most common language, you can say that much of it began here, at Thanet, because this is where the Germanic language entered Britain and the language of the Britons, took another turn in becoming what it is today. So we've had the Romans twice, and then the Jutes, the Angles and the Saxons, all using the Isle of Thanet as a perfect staging post in a campaign of terror against the mainland. But was there anyone else? The answer to that question is yes, and thanks for asking. Thanet wasn't just a trading hub, it was a religious site too. In 597 AD, the historian Bede writes that Augustine of Canterbury landed here before going on to found Britain's second ever Christian monastery at the nearby city of Canterbury, which is beautiful, and everything has been fine ever since. Thanet remained a spiritual waypoint. This dual identity of half sacred, half strategic made the Isle of Thanet a magnet for both monks and marauders. One came to pray, the other to pillage, sometimes both, depending on the mood. Okay, so now we've had the Romans twice. And then the Jutes, the Angles and the Saxons and the Christians all using the Isle of Thanet as a perfect staging post in a campaign of either terror in the name of conquest or terror in the name of God. But it's fine now, right? Surely that's it. The answer to that question is no, but thanks for asking. Now, before we continue, let me take a tiny split second to remind you that if you're also into history with sarcasm injected into its blood, which is basically this entire channel, then please also do remember to like and subscribe. It's one of the few things keeping my wife off my back and judging me for the time I spend on this when there are still shelves needing put up. Thank you. Right then, so roll forward another century or two, and Thanet's strategic location made it a prime target for Viking raids during the 8th to 10th centuries AD. Because if you're a Norse warrior looking for loot, livestock and light religious desecration, Thanet is basically the Magaluf of coastal pillaging. It's cheap, accessible and guaranteed not to disappoint. The Vikings used Thanet as a winter base not once but twice. Following the initial Viking raids down the east coast of Britain, the Isle of Thanet became a regular target for bloodthirsty Norsemen looking for loot. Thanet's separation from the mainland made it difficult to defend, and its host of monasteries provided lots of nice, shiny things for Vikings to steal. And when they weren't stealing the stuff inside, the Danes also saw great purpose and used those same monasteries as their headquarters and banquet halls. And so it was here in 851 and then again in 854 AD that the Vikings first used Thanet as a winter base, somewhere to keep warm until the snow melted and they could resume their hobby of beating people up for not giving them enough stuff. In the year 865, the Viking Great Heathen Army camped here at Thanet, presumably because the local monastery Airbnb scene was thriving. The people of Kent tried to pay them off, which went about as well as expected. The locals offered the Vikings an absolute shit-ton of money and goods in the hopes that this would be enough to keep the peace. The Vikings, however, did not appreciate this peace offering. The Vikings took the money, then took the swords, then took the lives of the people of Kent, then took the stuff, and then took the land. Classic Scandinavian customer service. As if at least 1,000 years of staging post-bloodshed wasn't enough. It gets even spicier, or at least it does in my opinion, which is generally not highly regarded. Some scholars have speculated that the name Thanet might derive from Tanit, the chief goddess of Carthage and a major deity in the Phoenician religion. Yes, you read that right. Thanet might be named after a Punic goddess worshipped in North Africa and Spain. Is there hard evidence? No. Is there linguistic ambiguity and a desperate need for academic relevance? Absolutely. The theory hinges on the idea that Phoenician traders may have established outposts along the British coast and that Thanet's name echoes Tanit's. It's speculative, it's fringe, and it's deliciously infuriating to anyone who insists all British place names must be Celtic or Anglo-Saxon. So let's run with it. Imagine Thanet as the Miami of the Bronze Age, where Phoenician merchants docked their ships, invoked Thanet for good fortune, and promptly regretted everything when they saw the local women. I should add that this is widely argued, though. In fact, there is even evidence that Thanet is a Germanic name and is not what the locals called this place before those violent bros appeared. In his own History of Britain, in the 8th century, Bede writes something that I will now just copy-paste. Vortigern welcomed Horsa and Hengist, and handed over to them the island that in their language is called Thanet. In British it is called Ru-Oim. And I don't know about you, but I think I kind of prefer that original British name, don't you? After thousands of years of occupation, invasion, and questionable naming conventions, Thanet's island status began to fade. The Isle of Thanet had first formed around 5000 BC when the sea levels rose after the last glacial period. However, after more than 6,500 years, things began coming to an end. The Wantsome Channel slowly silted up, thanks to soil runoff and the general British aversion to dredging anything that isn't a scandal. By the late 15th century, Thanet was no longer an island in any meaningful sense. The water was gone, the romance was gone. All that remained was a peninsula with a superiority complex and a lot of chalk. And I'd like to add here that anyone living in Britain nowadays should really be thankful that this place was no longer an island when it came time for the Nazis to visit. Given its history of a staging post for successful invasions of the mainland, it's very possible that history as we know it today may have gone very differently.
Mit dem Angriff Steiners wird das alles in Ordnung kommen.
Mein Führer, Steiner konnte nicht genügend Kräfte für einen Angriff massieren. Der Angriff Steiner ist nicht erfolgt.
Es bleiben im Raum Keitel, Jodl, Krebs und Burgdorf. Das war ein Befehl! Der Angriff Steiners war ein Befehl! Wer schickt Sie, dass Sie es wagen, sich meinen Befehl zu widersetzen? So weit ist das also gekommen. Das Militär hat mich belogen! Jeder hat mich belogen, sogar die SS! Die gesamte Generalität ist nichts weiter als ein Haufen niederträchtiger, treuloser Feiglinge!
Mein Führer, ich kann nicht zulassen, dass die Soldaten, die für Sie verbrechen...
Nicht als Feiglinge! Verräter, Versager!
Mein Führer, was Sie da sagen, ist ungeheuerlich!
Die Generalität ist das Geschmeiß des deutschen Volkes! Sie ist ohne Ehre! Sie nennen sich Generale, weil Sie Jahre auf Militärakademien zugebracht haben, nur um zu lernen, wie man Messer und Gabel hält! Jahrelang hat das Militär meine Aktionen nur behindert! Es hat mir jeden nur ersichtlichen Widerstand in den Weg gelegt! Ich hätte gut daran getan, von Jahren alle höheren Offiziere liquidieren zu lassen, wie Stalin!
Today, Thanet includes Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate. 3 towns that oscillate between charming and needs a bit of paint and a miracle. Victorian holidaymakers once flocked here for sea air and syphilis. Now it's a mix of art galleries, crumbling architecture and the occasional donkey ride. Margate has reinvented itself as a hipster haven, complete with vintage shops and ironic tattoos. Broadstairs clings to its Dickensian legacy despite Charles Dickens probably just liking the view and nothing else. Ramsgate has a marina and a lingering sense of disappointment left over by people whose ancestors once enjoyed a sea view, but nowadays have merely a view. Thanet is a place of contradictions. Once an island, now a peninsula. Once a strategic base, now a nostalgic footnote, possibly named after a Phoenician goddess, but probably just a linguistic accident. It's been invaded, traded, prayed over, invaded again, and then again, and then again, and then ignored. And through it all, Thanet has remained defiantly Thanet. Awkward, chalky, and historically overqualified for its current role as Kent's northeastern shrug. And so it's time again for us to ask ourselves what lessons can be learned from the Isle of Thanet, because all great lessons end in review. In fact, if there is no review, can we even call it a lesson? And as someone who used to be a real-life teacher, I can tell you that the answer is no, we can't, because them's the rules. So let's recap what we've learned today, shall we? Well, as is fast becoming a repeating theme in this series of videos, we are once again reminded not to waste time trusting Mother Earth. She moves around a lot and you just kind of have to hope and pray it won't happen too much in your lifetime nearby where you live. Thanet was once an island and now it isn't, and it's probably going to happen again. We've also learned that the language I'm speaking today is all thanks to a British king asking for help, gifting his enablers some land, and then making it easy for them to continue kicking ass as much as they pleased. Hengist, Horsa, the Jutes, the Angles, the Saxons, all of them became British thanks to the Isle of Thanet. And as tragic as the disappearance of something as pretty as water and islands can be, this is also a reminder that maybe things could be a lot worse. Imagine how shit life might be today if Adolf Hitler had gotten a foothold here. So remember, not to cry too much. Bridges and water views and boats and fish and islands are nice and stuff, but Nazis are not. And finally, you can name a British peninsula after a Phoenician goddess, and honestly, no one will stop you. The goddess Thanet may or may not have inspired the name Thanet, but the fact that this theory even exists, well, it just proves that academia is basically improvisation with footnotes. So that's it for today's We History lesson. Fine ladies and fine gentlemen, quick shout out to the world's greatest Patreon members who have been, and will continue to be Stephen, Malichi I, A, Anthony T, George H, Thad S, Dee Dee, and David R. Thank you all so much. I'll be back with another video soon, so I hope you'll join me then. Thanks again, peace, love, and the Isle of Thanet. Goodbye!